That was a beautiful introduction. And I would like to echo Scott's remarks about our acknowledgement to our ancestors, our appreciation of all the efforts by all the participants, and my deep gratitude for the support by many others. I would pick up from, in a sense, from where Scott has taken us already, which is to the reflections on how public space is experienced. And not only experienced, but how it is interpreted and understood. We're already in an interesting public space, and it's an interior space. And culture is fundamentally experienced, perceived as so, in the dominant perceptions in the humanities, as experienced in an interior space. Our attention, as yours is right now, is focused to the valued object, me. The person speaking to you. Traditionally, it would be focused at the altar in a church, or an object of work of art in a museum, or a screen in a cinema, or a stage at a theatre. That focal point is a way of also concentrating and directing your behaviour, your perceptual and embodiment of certain codes of bourgeois citizen, or the attentive scholar, or the reverential devout person. Okay? All those codes of conduct, all those modes of attention are familiar to us. They've been so deeply inscribed we take them as a given. And that's how we perceive how culture operates. However, as Scott has already indicated to us, increasingly, if not dominantly, in our society today, culture doesn't operate in this kind of format, but out in the street, in a public context, in a network of a multitude of platforms and a diversity of sources. Our gaze is no longer focused to this ideal object, but it is also increasingly dispersed in multidimensional and in interactive, in iterative manner. In other words, it's gone from the linear focal point to a non-linear horizontal kind of ambient space. Now, this transformation has been something that has been noted since the beginning of the 20th century. Zimmel talked about the blasé attitude, Walter Benjamin talked about distraction, Marshall McLuhan talked about the slump of exhaustion that we all face, and recently anthropologists like Laura Marx, or George Marcus and Sarah Pink have been saying we need to adapt our ethnographic tools to think about the ways in which the affective experience and the performative dimensions of public life are now critical to our understanding of what is culture. So from that perspective, we've started to ask questions. I'm now referring to a project that Scott and Paul Carter and Audrey Yu, my colleague who's also been involved in our preliminary and our other research, is also including Stephanie Hannon, has started to do in terms of the experience of public space. And we've asked ourselves, what are the tools that we need to understand, evaluate, and respond to this kind of transformation? The dominant tools in the social sciences are mass surveys. Of course, those mass surveys are very good at giving you indications of numbers, of attendance and participants, etc. But of course, incapable of demonstrating any of the qualities of experience. So they're obviously fundamentally limited. The qualitative tools that have been refined and developed in the humanities for well over a century have adopted a single point perspective. The assumption is that the critic, like the reverential person going to the altar, or the person at the theatre, or the good bourgeois visitor at the museum, or the dedicated scholar, is looking at a specific object, focusing in a linear kind of way, engaging their critical, comparative, imaginative skills, but in a kind of deliberative, normative, linear manner. So that representative role of the critic, I think, operates in a mindset and in a positionality and adopts a perspective which I think constrains them from fully grasping and engaging with the diversity, the complexity, the iterative nature of our culture is actually experienced in the context of geomedia of a network society. So we have come to the view that if art is increasingly unbound, if it is distributed and dispersed in this new network environment, what are the approaches that we can take that overcome some of the flaws and limitations that have prevailed in the social sciences and the humanities? And we've tried to find a particular set of sites whereupon we can commence some investigations. One of the ideal sites is the Civic Square here in the centre of Melbourne, Federation Square, which not only is a place of meeting, but also has large screens. It's surrounded by cultural institutions like the NGV and ACME, and is a place of intense interactive and networked cultural behaviour. And it's also a very interesting site because it is adjacent to and connected to the whole of the South Bank Arts Precinct, where our theatres, our concert halls, our art galleries are also located. In other words, all the classical institutional spaces whereupon which you enter as a visitor, sit down or parade through the artworks and adopt that linear perspective that I talked about. If we had just used the statistics that the government provides, all these 12 major institutions, the sum total, taking them at their best count, of all their visitors, almost, but not entirely, but almost equals the number of visitors who go through Fed Square. Interesting document that in itself, that people in the outdoor environment have claimed to have had a cultural experience to a larger extent than all the sum of our cultural institutions in the indoor environment. So we ask ourselves, how do we understand this new majority? What are the tools do we have for appreciating and measuring and evaluating and critiquing that kind of experience? If we add a number of other things like the Vivid Festival in Sydney, the White Night success story in Melbourne and globally, then these numbers become even more inflated. The urgency for this approach becomes even more pressing. So we ask ourselves, given these volumes, what are the tools for understanding, comprehending, evaluating, advising on this ambient experience of art and culture in an urban environment? So we're trying to distinguish ourselves both from the traditional tools that I've already mentioned, but also speak to some of the new artistic practices which have said this is exactly where contemporary art needs to be. These are exactly the kind of scenarios that contemporary art really wants to exploit, explore and develop. Interestingly, while the artists have spoken and worked in this new kind of interface, the critical debate, not entirely, but almost entirely, on contemporary art has been on the intelligence of the artistic proposition in terms of its aesthetic and formal qualities, or on its worthiness as a social kind of meritorious kind of activity. But very little has been done, if anything, to verify whether the artistic intent and the public experience have any connection whatsoever. I'm not saying that they're not connected, but I'm just saying that we just don't know how they're connected and to what extent the public actually experiences in any way or shape or form the kinds of ideas and forms that have been already proposed by artists for over a decade. So our aim, and this is in a sense picking up an idea from Willem Flusser, which is it's no longer important to decode the object of art. What is important here, says in this contemporary context, is to follow its trajectories. Where does it link you to? What relations is it starting to form? So we've set ourselves the task of trying to develop projects and processes and observational techniques where we can not just measure in terms of quantitative or in terms of an idealized self-linear qualitative perspective, but get some kind of collage of the processes and qualities of experience that occur in these open and public spaces. Now here I'm of course referring to the results that Stephanie's already started to develop, and our research through surveys, interviews and observational work at Federation Square has revealed some things that we had already anticipated, but they've got new kind of detail and new nuance, which has been extremely informative. Of course, one of the interesting qualities which the architects and people like Ross Gibson, who's very much been involved, and Paul Carter, one of the designers, is that, of course, it has been experienced as an open space. But open in both a physical sense, that you can get in and out in various kinds of ways, but also in a symbolic way, in the sense that people feel included, feel actually present there, feel like they can just pass through without having to have a specific purpose or intent. So this idea of flow, you can meander here, that you can pause here, have some respite, you can get some distraction, you can ignore everything that's going on, you can punctuate your day and then continue, fulfilled some of the intentions that I know people like Ross and Paul, who have been active in its design, have actually